Hello, and welcome back to another fun-filled episode of the Hammercast. I am your host, Alex, the Hebrew Hammer Salkin, and boy, oh boy, am I excited because we have got none other than Chief Instructor for StrongFirst, Brett Jones, on the other line today, and we are going to be talking about a wide array of very cool stuff. I feel like in many ways, Brett is a man of mystery because people know who he is, people know a lot about him, and they've seen some of his cool feats, but he's low key and he's humble, even though he does not need to be. So I'm going to try to get some of the cool information out of him, as well as talk about a little bit about some of the iron cardio protocols that he is working on at the moment. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the show, and it's going to be a very good one, folks. Because if you've never heard from Brett before, you can. It really is like drinking from a fire hose. He's a wealth of knowledge and information, and that will be on display in all of its glory on this episode. And before we begin, too, if you have not, I highly recommend that you pick up my 9-minute kettlebell and bodyweight challenge. It's designed to be done in conjunction with whatever other training you're doing. So it's not the sort of a thing you have to put everything else to the side and do. And it's based around gait pattern movements that can help to strengthen your body in general, as well as your particular kettlebell and bodyweight movements that you're working on. And I'm told that it's a lot of fun as well. I mean, fun relative to what we find fun in terms of kettlebell and calisthenics work. So go to 9minutechallenge.com and you can get your own free copy. It's digital, so you get access to it right off the bat. That is the number 9minutechallenge.com, and it is all yours. So without further ado, Brett, welcome to the program.
Alex, thank you so much for the opportunity to be on the podcast and speak to you and your audience.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. I mean, we were just chatting a little bit before, and I think the last time we saw each other was at this was still RKC back in those days, in Orlando in 2010. And for me, it was a very cool experience because like I was telling you also before, I watched your show reel many times of you doing these incredible feats of strength and making them look easy. Some stuff, that I never even thought possible, like jumping up into a handstand on a pair of kettlebells and then jumping down and then snatching the kettlebells. It was, really cool stuff like that. But what was especially amazing, I think, was to see how good you were at a wide array of things, and it wasn't just like one thing or another. And it made me wonder, well, how exactly did you get into training in general? Because certainly you've been at this for a while. So what's your origin story? Like, were you always active as a youth? Is this something you discovered, in your 20s, 30s, that sort of a thing? Give us an idea of like the beginnings of Brett Jones.
Sure. Well, short story long. Really the beginnings would be junior high wrestling, and having seen from my father, who had gained weight due to stopping smoking, but then started exercising and would be up in the morning, 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, out to the gym, out for a run. Just really setting a great example of what fitness, could be. And then as I got into wrestling and I started strength training, my father, and family supported that from my brother and I, and we had one of the first DP pulley systems. You're going to have to Google that one because that's not even in existence anymore.
My dad has one, actually.
Okay, so it's the old DP pulley system. And then we got kind of an Olympic weightlifting set, big bench, and plenty of weights and a pull-up bar and things like that. So, kind of getting into wrestling in 6th grade kind of kicked me off on this journey of wanting to be strong and for my sport, but then also discovering I had a decent base level of strength. As I was coming out of high school wrestling, at one point I would start my workout with like 6 sets of 12 behind the neck pull-ups and then flip around and do a set of 20 to the front and then start my training session. So I was pretty good at pull-ups. I had a pretty good body weight to strength ratio, graduated high school at a massive 150 pounds, and but had a decent base level of strength. Wandered a little bit through college. Got back into some, losing some weight and doing some stuff in grad school, became an athletic trainer. So I was spending a lot of time, with athletics and the training programs that the athletes were going through. But then, later in life, I transitioned from athletic training into the fitness world, becoming the director of a hospital wellness center. And at that time is when I really started on what has been my current, fitness path since 95. And so, coming through that, a former employee had come back and said, "Hey, you got to check out this Pavel guy." And so he recommended that I get Power to the People, which took me a little while, but then I pulled the trigger on it and got the Power to the People and started deadlifting and trying the side press and different things like that. And then, of course, the marketing machine kicked in, and I started getting all the messages about kettlebell and kettlebell. So I ordered the original RKC book, Russian Kettlebell Challenge book, and literally I looked at it and I said, I can do all this with a dumbbell, and I threw it in a drawer. But it kept scratching at the back of my brain. It made its way in there. And so a few months later, I pulled the book out and I'm like, I want to try this. So I hooked up a dumbbell, 50-pound dumbbell, and tried one of the snatch protocols. And once I was revived by EMS, I decided I should. That's a joke. For those of you that don't know me, that is a joke. But
very dry sense of humor.
So. Exactly. But it doing that snatch workout, even with a dumbbell, made me think, you know what? I need to go get trained in this. And so I got my first kettlebell late in 01, December of 01. I got certified at the second ever certification with Pavel in February of 02, and started teaching with him at certifications in April of 03. So coming up on 20 years of teaching with Pavel, over 20 years of being certified. And it's been, as the Grateful Dead noted long ago, what a long, strange trip it's been for the last 20 years.
I can imagine.
Yep.
No, go for it. I don't want to interrupt. I'm marveling at the idea of having been certified for 20 years and knowing Pavel all this time. Just, the amount of stuff that you've picked up and how much things have changed. So I have to ask, on that note, like given that I think you said you were at the second ever certification. Now, what was that like exactly? Because the principles have all stayed the same, but the tactics have changed very drastically. So give us an idea of how he taught the swing or the clean or the snatch, like back then versus now.
Oh man, you wouldn't recognize it really. We came in, it was from like 1 or 2 p.m. on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. We started with the military press. I don't think we started with the swing. I think we started with the military press. We were throwing water balloons at each other in February, Minnesota, and learning how to absorb force and not get wet from the water balloon. So there's some really interesting tactics and things involved. Just completely different. And over the years, what we've done is kind of refined all of that into something that's just a very accessible system. We have our standards, we have our expectations, but it was Jeff Newport told me years ago, the reason I got involved is you guys can get somebody swinging a bell in 5 minutes. Exactly. We want to have this low tech, high concept has been Pavel's kind of tagline for a long time, and we approach the training very much like that. But yeah, that February 02, really interesting. But yeah, we were learning, very different. I can't even get into all the details because I've forgotten them, but I just know that it was vastly different.
Yeah, well, I'm sure. I think if you get a water balloon thrown at you in a February in Minnesota, I think that's the sort of a thing that you don't easily forget. I can understand how some of the other things might have, faded by the wayside. And you made an interesting point about when you took a look for the very first time at the original Russian Kettlebell Challenge book. You just kind of gave it a once over and you said, well, I can do all this with a dumbbell. Now, surely after you got certified and you were officially hooked on the kettlebell, I can imagine you're trying to get your clients to do it. They probably had some similar things in mind, well, what's the difference between this and a dumbbell? Why can't we just use a dumbbell or a machine or what have you? So what were some of the things that you told them but like how to overcome like some of the objections and get them excited like you were to, start swinging a kettlebell as opposed to a dumbbell.
What, and at that time, nowadays you see kettlebells in advertisements, you see kettlebells in Walmart, you see there'll be a fitness article that comes out on the Wall Street Journal, and it will have nothing to do with kettlebells, but the person's got a kettlebell in their hand. Like, it has become such a known tool. You go into hotel fitness centers and there's kettlebells. It's almost kind of hard now to go into a gym and not find a kettlebell. Might not be the world's best kettlebell, but there's probably some kettlebells in the facility. So rewind 20 some odd years, and nobody knows what a kettlebell is. Very, very, very few people have ever seen one. And so the initial thing to overcome is, what's that? And my strategy was always, well, let's just get them doing something with it. So use it for a single leg deadlift, use it for a deadlift, use it for a one arm row, get the tool in their hand so that it just becomes part of the routine. This is just something that we use to do this drill. Once you get that comfort going, it's okay, well, now we're going to try this new thing with it. But it's not a new thing to them. They've been using it for X number of weeks or sessions or whatever. And now, as we introduce some of the more unique kettlebell moves, swings and cleans and things of that nature, you've kind of overcome that first hurdle of what the heck is this? So that was always my strategy. And then I enjoyed early on the fact that the weights were all in kilos, which nobody in the US, understands or uses. And so, I would hand somebody an 8 kilo or a 16 kilo or whatever it is. And typically it'd be like, 8 pounds, that felt pretty good. I'm like, you're absolutely right. It's 16 pounds. But yeah, that looked really good. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, that's in kilos. That's actually, a little over 16 pounds. And you were just, doing great with it. And so I could trick people safely into using a more appropriate load when most people at the time were, wanting to take 5-pound dumbbells and pump out some really high rep stuff. But then they start realizing, I'm a lot stronger than I think I am. And so that's always been a message that I've wanted people to get, is that there's a lot more strength residing in you than you give yourself credit for.
Yeah, and I think the unique approach that we use with kettlebells, where it's primarily compound movements, makes it a lot easier for people to tap into that strength that they don't realize that they have. Because I did the same thing, and I realized that my European listeners are not going to be able to identify with this because they all understand kilos, but we Americans, we definitely do not in general, unless you're a kettlebell instructor or maybe a drug dealer. Then you might understand like the kilos thing. But I did the same thing with a gal that I taught many years ago. She was like an executive at a TV station, and I would train her twice a week. And I remember she'd been working on goblet squats, and I had some, we'll say, cheaper kettlebells that were listed in pounds. So I might say like, I don't know, like 20 pounds or something like that. And then I had the nice kettlebells that were listed in kilos. And so, 20 kilos. So I told her, okay, so now we're going to do just 3 goblet squats, and you're going to use the 20 right there. And so she was used to using the 20 pounds. She didn't think twice about it. And she, knocked off 3 goblet squats with or however many it was, with the 20 kilos. And she said, wow, that feels really heavy today. I'm like, well, that's because that was 20 kilos. So that's about 44 pounds. And it was like like a light bulb went off in her head. Like, oh my gosh. She like, and after that, like the heavy weights weren't as scary anymore. Now it was like a point of pride, like I can lift a lot heavier than I thought. And it was just like the resistance started to fall by the wayside. So I do think that's a good, I really think all kettlebells should be listed in kilos for precisely this reason, because it's a lot easier to trick people safely, like you pointed out, into lifting heavier without realizing it. Now, apart from the difference in, using kilos versus pounds, given that you've been involved in the kettlebell world for 2 decades now, what are some of the changes that you have seen take place that you are excited about, and what are some things that we used to do that you think we should bring back?
So I'm just excited by the growth, the fact that this has become a known, recognized tool. in the first 5 to 10 years, I would hear repeatedly, it's a fad, nobody's going to be doing this. And I'm like, okay, you keep thinking that. So I'm excited just by the growth and the recognition of this tool as a very effective training implement, and that we've been at the forefront of pushing that forward for all of this time. And now as more and more research comes out, and we see the potential return on investment of working with kettlebell training and what it can do for you, not only strength wise but cardiovascularly, and what it can do for athletes and power production, and how it has what we've referred to as a long time as the what the heck effect. I'm doing swings and get-ups and I just PR'd my pull-ups. How does that happen? And I think there's some reasons for that, but I'm just excited by the growth and the recognition. Things that we used to do that I would kind of like to see come back is a shorter list than you might think, because we have taught the same 6 skills for almost 20 years. We are at our level 1. We are an inch wide, mile deep as far as those skills go. And we're not trainers who work by entertaining.
Of course.
Yeah, we are strength professionals and students of strength, and we approach this from a very simple standpoint. But simple should not be mistaken for easy. And the fact that we make it simple doesn't mean that there's not great complexity and science behind what we're doing. And so, early on, I'm actually having trouble coming up with something that we used to do that I wish would come back. One hand switch snatch sessions, because I think you learn a lot about grip and direction of energy and protecting your hands when you're forced to stick with one hand for many reps, and then knowing it's just like going out on a hike. It feels great going out, but then at some point you've got to turn around. If you're not on a loop, you got to turn around and come back. So what felt easy going out might not feel that easy coming back. And so pace yourself on the way out. So I think you learn a lot in those kind of single hand switch sets that can be of benefit.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. I think that I remember, gosh, I mean, I never had to go through it, because when I did my certification, at this point, they'd already switched to the 100 reps in 5 minutes. But I do remember one time, just for fun, I was like, I'm going to see how many I can do on one hand. And my technique was good, my preparation was good. So I managed to get 30 on one hand without really ever doing any more than like 10 in a row. So it's very doable. And they were all hard style, there was no real change in the technique per se. But you're right, you do have to be very cognizant of what your hands are doing. If you're like death gripping the bell at the top, you're going to have a bad time. You're going to be a lot more tired at the end. Yeah, I think that would be a cool challenge. I think the one thing that I would say that I think is nice is that there's more of an emphasis on training, particularly for strength and explosive power, as opposed to, like, when I first started, it was like how much of a beatdown can you survive? And I'm not talking about like the certification weekend, when it's kind of like you have to do a lot of work because that's a part of the certification. I mean, like in my own workouts, I'd be like, how crazy can I make this complex, or how difficult can I do this and that? I think to some degree that has been reserved for just testing things out and just seeing what you can do, as opposed to like a daily approach to your training. So in that regard, I think that's one thing too that I'm glad to see has kind of fallen by the wayside a bit. Not in every fitness movement. There's still plenty of people who use a kettlebell for horrendous beatdowns.
Sure.
And good for them, why not? But glad we're not doing it.
Well, and I think this is something that over the years of research, study, and practice, in where Pavel's taken everything, is understanding the cost behind your training. And we want to treat training like an investment. Nobody says, I want to put $100 into the bank and get 10 out. That would be dumb.
Exactly.
Everybody wants to put $10 in and get 100 out. Well, that's how you should approach your training. You
Mm-hmm.
want to put in what you need to put in, but you want a great return on investment. You don't want that 100 that you put in to disappear. And too many people treat their training like that. They treat it as that thing that they survive instead of thrive from. And
Exactly.
that doesn't mean you train easy. Sometimes you do. I certainly have sessions that are easy for me, but I also have sessions that are where I challenge myself appropriately. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think understanding what is the cost behind this training and what is my return on investment going to be, and having shifting mindset. I'll speak more specifically to the United States. There's 80% of the population that don't exercise. That's awful.
Yeah.
And most of them don't exercise because they perceive it to be a punishment. They think you only exercise in order to look a certain way. It's
Mm-hmm.
the Jim Gaffigan joke. I went to the gym and I saw all these fit people, and I'm like, "You're done. You can go home. You did it." And that's not the point, right? So we see it as a punishment. We train only for aesthetics, and we think we just do it to look a certain way. The fact that our physical fitness is part of our health, and there's an old George Hackenschmidt quote: "Strength cannot be divorced from health." And well, fitness cannot be divorced from health. It is what we do to manage this machine that we drive around the universe. And
Yeah.
so, and you have to reach a point that you enjoy the physicality, you enjoy the training. Well, since most people see it as a punishment, they see it as something you do only to look a certain way, the enjoyment's hard to find. And
Mm-hmm.
then add to that their return on investment is usually poor. They're putting 100 in, getting 10 out. If we can flip that script for them to where they put 10 in and get 100 out, I think a lot more people will be exercising.
I think so too. And I think the mindset, well, the note you made about mindset, I think is especially important because, yeah, you're right. People have a tendency to think in extremes, that especially if it's something they don't understand all that well. It's like, well, either I work out for an hour a day, or what's the point? Or
Right.
either I go to the gym, or, I just can't exercise. And to some degree, you have to almost like let people know that they have permission to do less and just show up, get in a reasonably good training session. And it doesn't have to be long, it can be very short, and they can still get a lot of quality work done in that time. But this is the sort of a mindset that I think we have that just comes to us naturally. But most people that you talk to, they might see somebody who looks even reasonably fit and think, that person probably lives in the gym, like, or that person's a fitness professional. So of course, they can just work out all day. So of course they're in great shape. And you certainly know better than that, because if you're a busy professional and you're training people all the live long day, it's almost harder to work out, because it's like there's always somebody that you got to help, something you've got to do. You have very little time to yourself. So I couldn't agree more. I think that that's one of the great things about the kettlebell, as well as things like calisthenics, is that it allows you to get in quality work that can turn that $10 into $100, just in your living room or in your bedroom. Like Dan John used to say, with this 28-kilo bell in my bedroom, I can train for nationals. And it's not hyperbole. It's a very potent tool if you know how to use it. And you bring up a couple of points that I find interesting, because this is a side of training that I have to say I know a little bit about, but less about in general. And this would be the science and the research side of things, which, at least in our niche in the industry, seems to be almost like, I don't want to say like a buzzword, but it's almost like, that's the thing that people appeal to now. Like, well, what does the research say? What does the science say? And in my opinion, it's a little bit of there's a little bit of danger to it, because the science and the research is always behind what successful people are already doing. So how, given that you were very focused on the research and trying to find out what we can track and measure and manage, how do we manage between the experience that the best the experience that the best have from doing what they do naturally, applying that to our students, and then also using scientific research to guide ourselves into the future?
So, well, there's different kinds of research. And it doesn't always have to be, university driven, placebo controlled, double blind, sort of research and waiting on meta analysis and things like that. The way the Russians did their research, and where Pavel has drawn a lot of information, obviously from his background and his schooling, is they would track these athletes and these people for multiple Olympic cycles. So you would have athletes, and this was one of the things that within the Russian system, in particular with Olympic weightlifting and things of that nature, where another famous system is the Bulgarian system. And so they won a bunch of medals as well, but they usually won one, and then they weren't competing anymore. The Russians won multiple Olympic medals over multiple Olympic cycles. So you're taking somebody's training program and they are monitoring everything that's going on. They're tracking everything that's going on. And the old saying is success leaves clues, right? Well, this is another form of research where you're manipulating variables and you're seeing how that turns out over time. And so looking at both sides of the coin, we're doing some force plate research right now with Antonio Squilante at USC, and looking at what are the force profile characteristics of the kettlebell swing, and at what weight do we actually start producing a more optimal power output. So that's going on. So we're on the research end of things. When Pavel was developing strong endurance, he took a deep dive into mitochondrial research and conditioning, and it's biochemistry and stuff that usually that's how you weed people out of medical school. You get them, you put them in a bio 101, and you get into some of this biochemistry, and people are like, my brain. And so, but he took the deep dive into that and really was able to pull out these training protocols and principles that we use in designing some of the conditioning protocols that are just amazing. So some of my favorite ways to train. So it's using the research to validate certain things. It's tracking people over time, manipulating variables. It's a combination. So success leaves clues. We want to look at those experiences. We want to see what the successful people have been doing. And that's been one of Pavel's strengths, and one of our strengths for a long time is, and as Louis Simmons put it, reverse engineering. Take a look at what those very successful people are doing, reverse engineer it so that we can get it out to more people. Sometimes the successful person doesn't know why they're successful.
Sure.
Usually there's a big guy walking around the gym. He was just born that way. I have a friend of mine that he walks by a set of weights, he puts on a kilo. Right.
Yeah.
He's just
hitting PRs without even touching anything.
Yeah. I mean, now he's also a smart trainer, which is the scary combination. But, I've worked in enough gyms to where I know the guy or the gal that looks the part and gets the clients may not actually, they were just born that way. They may not know how they got that way. I think things that you struggle for, you're better at coaching. And so that process of self-discovery, being an N of one, looking where success has left clues, looking at what the research tells us, that combination gives us a very robust program and a very, very robust background.
Yeah, no, that does make perfect sense. I think and what you said in particular about a lot of times people don't know why they're successful. I know Pavel mentions this in one of his books. It might have been Power to the People. Or maybe it was one of his earlier ones, but he said, do you think Cindy Crawford looks like Cindy Crawford because she does her workout tapes, or because she's Cindy Crawford? And it's like, well, it's a very salient point. And you're right. I think that there are a lot of people for whom things come naturally and they gravitate toward them because they're good at them. And so, it's maybe people with shorter arms and like barrel chest are really good at benching. And then you've got somebody like me with an albatross wingspan and just sort of like a normal torso, and like, bench is just never something I've been all that great at. And so you can use all the, the tips that you want, but there are certain other like physiological things that I simply would have to overcome. So it would make more sense if you find somebody who understands that and is successful, so that they can bridge the gap between the things that they found work and the things that you are going to need to do in order to make them work, in order for you to actually make some real improvements. Now, One other thing that I want to talk about, because I'm very curious about this sort of a thing, is what we talked about a little bit earlier, which is the iron cardio. And I think this has been something that, you mentioned Pavel with strong endurance and that sort of a thing. And this has been something that's sort of been brewing in the StrongFirst world for some time, which is the ability to increase at least this is how I see it, increase your endurance by increasing your strength, or using principles of strength to increase your endurance. So in some ways, that almost seems like these are two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. How do they get married together, and how is that process even possible, of using strength or iron training, as we might just call it in general, to improve your endurance or your cardio?
Well, I'm going to separate those two, because if we're talking cardiovascular adaptations, there's some very specific things that we're looking for, and it's muddy. That end of things, because there's peripheral adaptations as far as vascularization, mitochondrial efficiency, how the body responds to the pressure of strength training, versus zone 2 cardio work, where we're on an elliptical, we're on a hike, we're out for a jog, if you're somebody that does that.
No judgment, folks.
No judgment. It's jealousy. It's pure jealousy on my part, because I'm not a good runner. But so zone 2 cardio work, where we're looking at stroke volume, and we're trying to really increase that left ventricular efficiency, without getting the type of ventricular hypertrophy that can get in the way of cardiovascular efficiency. There's a medium to be hit there. So it's a way muddier conversation than you might expect, because strength training, when you're developing tension, you have to work against the pressure load, which can start some left ventricular hypertrophy sort of adaptations. And then the volume load, because you're under pressure and you're not returning quite as much blood, you're not getting the stretch of the left ventricular area. And so there's aspects to be taken into consideration. I get into this in my upcoming ebook on iron cardio, and I have sat at the feet of people way smarter than me in this, so that I can sound like I know what I'm talking about.
So far, so good.
So far, so good. But one of the reasons the iron cardio protocol that I've been working with is based off of an article that Pavel and Alexei Sinart put out in 2014, which they termed it strength aerobics. And I have a student that gave me, he put it in his training log that his iron cardio work. And I'm like, wait, do you mean this? And he goes, yeah. I'm like, stealing it, totally stealing that name. I got his permission, though. He said it was okay.
Cool.
And so that use of strength training, if you look at the most simple protocol, clean press squat. So a couple of the differences: it's clean press squat. It's not 30, 40 seconds of multiple clean presses and squats. It is clean press squat, set it down, shake it off. Clean press squat, set it down, shake it off. And so and the load also matters, because I like to focus more towards a 5 or 6 RM sort of kettlebell, military press kettlebell. The original protocol was a 10 RM kettlebell. And so we're not doing max strength training and saying it's cardiovascular. And we're not doing high rep sets and saying that it's cardiovascular. We're treating iron cardios, and Pavel has started to use this description more to describe the ANA, alactic aerobic work, and some of the strong endurance protocols. It feels like manual labor. It feels like you've just put in a good work session, but you can keep doing it. And so that sort of mindset that I'm doing some manual labor is how we approach that. So couple of reasons why getting stronger improves your endurance. Let's look at it from a base strength perspective. And I'm going to make up numbers, so don't use these as gospel or anything. Let's say it takes you 1,000 motor units to accomplish movement X, jumping, whatever, running. 1,000 motor units to accomplish movement X. I make you stronger so you can now accomplish that same movement with 500 motor units, because if I increase the efficiency of those motor units, I increase their ability to produce strength and power. I should be able to accomplish that same movement with less motor units. Well, now I have 500 motor units in reserve. So as those first 500 fatigue out, I've got 500 more to kick on and start doing the work. And this is not based on high rep sets. Let's use running as an example. Basically, it's 1,500 steps per mile on the average gait length. Okay, that's 750 reps per leg at 4, ballpark 2 to 4 times body weight, just for a flat, even jog. Go downhill, it can be 10 times body weight. Sprint uphill, you can start hitting some of those 6 to 10 times body weight numbers. Do you really think 20 reps on a leg extension is reproducing the sort of muscular adaptations that you need for 750 reps per mile at 2 to 4 times body weight load? Of course not. But if I can make that muscle stronger, if I can get from that 1,000 motor units to 250 motor units, now I've got plenty of motor units in reserve to be able to still accomplish that movement. And that improves my endurance. And running's a power event. Some people don't think of it that way, but it's contact time and it's pushing off the ground. And whether you're jogging or sprinting, it's kind of a power event. And so the more efficient I am with that, the more motor units I have in reserve, which is built by strength, not by, like I said, 25 reps on a leg extension. Good luck with that making a big difference. So when you do things like the iron cardio, where I'll go 40 to 60 sets of clean press, squat, snatch. And when I say 40 to 60 sets, that split that in half, because that's a combination of both arms. I count the right arm as a set. I count the left arm as a set. And I do that because I like the numbers to be bigger. And I like making 2 hash marks on my training log versus 1. And so, yeah, it's a mental game. So when you approach it like that, you focus on the output per set. You keep the work per set within these time frames that work within our energy systems, to where I stay more alactic. I want a little bit of acid. I want to get into my glycolysis a little bit, but then I want my body to be able to clear it. So I want to give it the ability to clear it, that glycolysis. And glycolysis is a problem because it's the dirty. If you've ever been behind a diesel truck and you've, they hit the gas and you have to breathe in a bunch of diesel fumes, you understand that that's not the cleanest burning fuel out there. Alactic, there's not a lot of it, but it's a very, very quick and clean energy system. Aerobic, clean energy system that you can keep producing for a long time. The bridge between there is that glycolysis. And so we want to keep the set short enough to get a little bit of acid, a little bit of glycolysis, but then time to recover. And so that's a long-winded answer of all of these different aspects of. So when somebody says, oh, this improves endurance, man, what aspect of endurance? Because there's a lot of different aspects to get into, and cardiovascular adaptations and energy system adaptations. So there's a lot going on. Now, fortunately, you don't actually have to understand all of that science in order to put protocols into play. But you do have to embrace this idea of, in general, high output, short duration with good enough rest is the basic formula. And I've been saying for a long time, for a while now, and I'm going to keep beating this drum. Rest is the most abused training protocol, training variable. It's abused in set, between sets, during sessions, between sessions. We think rest is a bad thing. Rest is awesome. So long-winded answer, covered a lot of different things.
No, it's great. Particularly because I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of strength in general, but when it comes to endurance, a lot of times people, I don't feel like I know it nearly as well, and I think that in general also people like to use terms interchangeably if they're an enthusiast. So I think it's helpful to have definitions so that they can understand, well, this is really what we're looking for versus this. Like I remember many years ago having a discussion was on a hike. So again, it was like a zone 2 kind of an activity. And this was when I was living in Israel, and the guy I was speaking with was asking, he asked what I did for a living, and I explained, I'm a personal trainer, and the main thing I focus on is helping people get strong. And somehow we got to the topic of like running, and he said, well, okay, so if somebody's really good at running, could we say that they're strong? And now you bring up a very interesting point, because you're saying running is actually it's a power activity, but we don't often think about it. My answer to him was no at the time, but now I'm thinking, well, maybe I need to look this guy up and say, well, technically, bring up like conversation from 9 years ago and see if I can update him slightly. But we don't typically think of runners as being particularly strong, even if maybe they have good technique, or they're good at, or let's say they're competitive, they have excellent, excellent times, things like that. So if it's a power activity, then my question would be, how would you, let's say, take somebody who on either side of the field, either or on either side of the fence, rather, like they're really interested in endurance, how do you get them to start doing, let's say, like an iron cardio type protocol to improve their running, or take somebody who is really only interested in strength training and explain to them, okay, well, here's why you might want to change your normal set and rep scheme to work on improving some aspect of your endurance. How do you bridge that gap exactly, and get either side to want to take a sort of an avant-garde approach, like the one that you are prescribing?
Well, one thing real quick, strength is a many splendored thing. Mm-hmm. And it exists in a variety, a multitude of ways. When you go to the ballet and you see somebody performing jumps and ballet movements, there's a ton of strength and power involved in that. When you watch the athlete on the basketball court or the football or the soccer pitch, or whatever, there's strength is displayed in so many different ways. And so it's not one definition. It's what does strength mean to you within the context that you're going to be using it. Dancers need to be strong, but they build it in a way that maintains the aesthetics of the profession and of the goal activity. And so, strength means many things. And I think that's something that, and I've challenged people in this a variety of ways. If all of your listeners right now will kind of close their eyes and think, first word that pops into your head. If I say strength, what's the first word that pops into your head? Strong or strength. Surprisingly, that may not be a positive connotation. They could, bang, the first thing that pops up is a bad experience with a gym teacher, a phys ed teacher in junior high. It might be the bully who was perceived to be the strong person that was bullying them. They may perceive strength to be a very negative thing. And so we say strong, you want to be strong. And then the background processing, the first thing that's happening in their brain is, that's not good. Well, we got to change that message right now. And so truly strong people are kind people, in my experience. And I've had that proven right on are there bullies? Are there people that misuse their strength? Absolutely. Those people aren't truly strong. They're using their strength in an inappropriate fashion. So we need to change the conversation on strength a little bit, and get this to the point where people realize strength cannot be divorced from health. It is part of what we want to do. So the person that's overly focused on the strength end of things that lacks the conditioning, well, if I make your body more efficient at clearing waste products and having good mitochondrial efficiency, and your ability to produce work goes up, even though you're going to use it in a very strength-based fashion, if I improve your conditioning, and again, it's a long conversation to talk specifically about that, but if I just make you more efficient at clearing waste products, and you can produce more work over time, more efficiently, get a better return on investment, why wouldn't you take that journey? If you're all on the endurance end of things, the understanding that I can make you more efficient, by reducing the number of motor units, leaving you more motor units in reserve, getting you the ability to produce this power over time. And, that doesn't mean that it's a max effort power. It means that you can scale that down, where if on RPE scale, you had to be at an effort level of 7 or 8 to produce a certain movement, and I make it a 5. Well, again, I've just made you more efficient. You've got more effort to put in over time. So that's going to help you in that arena. And for the runners and the endurance athletes who are kind of stuck on this idea that my muscles just need to be, have good endurance, that conversation of 2 to 4 times body weight, single leg impact for 1,500 steps per mile, go on a 10-mile run, calculate the tonnage for even a 160-pound runner over 10 miles of that number of steps at just make it easy, 2 times body weight. The tonnage on that workout is massive. Do you have the strength to endure that? They call it strength endurance for a reason. Got to have both. And if you don't have any strength, don't worry about your endurance, because you don't have any strength to endure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think to be a truly well-developed person, you can't just lean into only one characteristic that your body's capable of, whether it is, strength, whether it's endurance, flexibility. You need some degree of all of these things in order to actually function very well. And then at some point, if you're good enough and you want to specialize in something, either for competitive purposes or whatever it may be, then you can start going really heavy into that. But I do think that it is a very common mistake that people find the one thing that, they really enjoy doing, and then they kind of forbid themselves to do anything else. It's almost like, it's like they're getting married and they can't cheat, on their chosen spouse, whether it's strength training. Like, if I go for a jog, like, I'm going to feel guilty. I'm going to come home, my kettlebells are going to look at me in a suspicious way or whatever. So,
well, our physicality and the things that we choose to take on becomes part of our identity. I've met people, you've met people where you say, oh, great to meet you. What do you do? I'm a runner. You get paid to run? That's awesome. Like, how did you get that gig? That's not what they mean. Yeah. But they identify themselves as a runner. I would say at one point, my previous identity was as the strong guy. I was the 11th guy in the world to bend the red nail. I've done some grip feats that very few people have done. I did okay at powerlifting. Then I reached a point where I wasn't the strong guy. And especially I've had to relearn that lesson a few times. I'm 2 years out from cancer treatment, and I'm a cancer survivor. And so restarting my training and physicality from really zero, having lost over 40 pounds during cancer treatment, and really had a rough time in treatment, to regaining my strength and physicality. You begin to realize that identity of I'm the strong guy, I'm the runner, I'm the calisthenics person, whatever that is, that can become a box. And so what happens when the box is taken away? When I was no longer the strong guy and I couldn't repeat some of the feats and things that I've had done in the past, who was I? Because if I wasn't that, who am I? And there's just so much more to be said for physicality, for general endurance and potential productivity, and just being the person that you are, not identifying yourself by an activity. There's a lot to dive into there, but that's one of the reasons people will grab so tightly to a particular activity. They're identifying themselves by it.
Yeah, it's a very good point. You're right. I see it all the time. I think people don't even, it's a very subconscious thing. Most people aren't really thinking, well, this is how I'm going to identify myself because of X, Y, and Z. It's just a natural process that occurs and builds up and what have you. And so it kind of reminds me of what you talked about earlier when you were teaching people with kettlebells in the early days. You weren't necessarily trying to teach them snatches right out of the gate. You're trying to get them to do things that maybe they already did with a dumbbell, like single leg deadlifts or rows or what have you, so that could kind of start to become enough of their identity where they were familiar enough with the tool that they were comfortable moving on to other things. And so to me, I see that as a great example of, like, here's how you can break out of the sort of the self-imposed identity you've given yourself based solely around one activity that you like, and you can spread it out into, you can use that as a starting point, let's say with like this iron cardio approach, and then you can start to expand your abilities both in the things you like as well as the things that you should be doing for your health and all that, and really go pretty far as a result. You gotta start where you are, and you've got to find a way to reach into new and exciting areas, and not let yourself get too hung up on, what you think that who you think you are as a result of the training you do a couple hours a week.
Absolutely. Now, the deeper psychological layers there is usually when somebody starts identifying themselves by an activity, it's because that's where they could get control over certain aspects of their life. And so that becomes very important to them, because that's where they've reasserted, or maybe for the first time, asserted some control over themselves, over their body, over their mindset, whatever the case may be. And so there's times where that conversation has to be entered into delicately, because there's a reason the person has gone that direction.
I've seen that on a number of occasions.
Yeah, had to go Dr. Phil there for a minute.
But you know what? That's what we have to do as trainers. I remember back, a couple of years ago, there was that meme going around. It was like these 6 different panels. It's like, what my friends think I do. It's like runners or whatever, like what my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do. And then finally it gets to like what I really do. And there was one for trainers, and it was all these different things, like what my friends think I do. And it's like this huge bodybuilder, or no, it was like what my mom thinks I do. And it was like a huge bodybuilder, and what my friends think I do. And it was like texting while, somebody else is, under your tutelage. And then what I actually do. And it was somebody on a psychologist's couch, and the trainer was like listening to them. I definitely found that was the case. There were a lot of times people that I trained, they really, like, you have to find out, like, sometimes they're training because they're trying to, like Mark Rifkin would say, they're trying to kill demons, like they're, like you just said, they're trying to gain some modicum of control. And I'll never forget it. At my RKC, I was hanging around a little bit later, and Dan John was there. He was one of the guys who was one of the team leaders. And he said, sometimes we forget just how much this certification means to people, because there's a 60-year-old guy or 60-something-year-old guy who, when they were, bringing people up to let them know whether they had passed or failed or whatever, he said, well, you passed, congratulations. And the guy was just like on the verge of tears. He was just so excited about it. And people forget that it's not just an activity. It's like a part of who you are as a person. And so it's not just as simple as you can compartmentalize it as like, okay, 45 minutes 3 times a week, I pick up some weights and then I just go about my day. It enters into your psyche. And if you're a trainer, you have to understand that, so that you can properly guide people, because that's what they're looking to you to do. And there is some sort of a psychological element that, even if you're not specifically trained for it, you've got to be able to find a way to keep people on the straight and narrow, and enjoy the process, as opposed to, letting them derail and fly out of control.
Well, and I would add to that, in specific to the certifications and things like that, because we have our standards and things that we look for. It is a rite of passage. You have to have accomplished these things in order to earn this thing. And so we have very few rites of passage in our lives now. And that, hanging that out there as a challenge, as you're not getting a participation trophy. You're not getting this. We're not going to give this to you because you paid your money. We're going to give this to you because you accomplished these requirements. And so having that rite of passage, having those expectations, is a powerful thing. And there are people who spend 6 months to a year preparing for the certification, because it's that physically demanding for them to do so. And so, yeah, I mean, I've had many tearful, congratulations. And on the flip side of that, I've had tearful, you didn't pass today conversations. And so you got to be prepared for both ends of that spectrum.
Absolutely. Well, Brett, this has been just an awesome conversation. And I think that everybody who's listening, who's not currently following you, first of all, has made a grave mistake up to this point, but they can rectify that. So where can people follow you online and keep up with your own research and, in particular, iron cardio, so that when the ebook is out, they can race out and snag themselves a copy?
So, website, appliedstrength.com, APPLIED strength.com. Instagram at Brett Jones SFG. I'm on Facebook as well, but if you do the same sort of at Brett Jones, you'll probably find me. I don't do much on Facebook. I just kind of repost what I do on Instagram. And yeah, I mean, and strongfirst.com, I put articles out there, and you can learn more, find a local instructor, do things related to that. As a global organization, we might have somebody near you, regardless of where you are in the globe, or we offer an online option that would satisfy. Video coming out through BJJ Fanatics on the Iron Cardio protocol. That's through their Strong and Fit website, but BJJ Fanatics is a pretty known group for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu information, and now they're Strong and Fit side of things. So few different options for where to find me and look into this.
Fantastic. Well, folks, I highly encourage you go to the show notes or the description, depending on where you are consuming this high quality interview that we have just completed, and follow Brett, get Iron Cardio. I'm definitely going to get a copy as soon as it comes out, because this is the first time hearing of it. I'm already very excited, because I remember that article by Pavel and Alexei from many moons ago, and I thought that it was quite brilliant, and I haven't done all that much with it. And so I'm excited to see the direction that StrongFirst is going in this capacity. And I have no doubt that there are very many cool things ahead. So thank you very much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. And great to talk to you and your audience. Thank you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And folks, if you enjoyed this, do yourself and your friends, family members, mortal enemies, whoever it may be, do them a favor and share this with them, and help spread the word of strength so that we can crush weakness together. And as always, have fun,